Hello, and welcome to the third installment of Becoming Caltech 1910 to 1930, Presentations from the Archives. I'm Peter Colopy, I'm University Archivist here at Caltech, and I have the pleasure to introduce three of my colleagues who will be presenting for you this evening. The first is Loma Karklins, our Archivist for Reader Services. The second, joining us on audio, is Judith Goodstein, our University Archivist Emeritus here at Caltech, and the author of 4 books, including Millikan School, A History of the California Institute of Technology. And third, we'll be hearing from Elisa Picchio, our Archivist for Digital Collection Development. Before we get started and hear from our 3 wonderful presenters, I want to share with you a little bit about the Becoming Caltech exhibit, which we're accompanying with these presentations. So we are doing this series of presentations in connection with an exhibit, which we opened on February 10th, and then unfortunately had to close a month later due to the current pandemic. But whenever we're able to, we're looking forward to opening the exhibit again, and we hope that those of you who are local to Pasadena or who have some occasion to travel here will come visit it, and we'll have a look at what we have to show you physically in that space as well. There's some overlap certainly between our presentations and the exhibit, but you'll find them distinct enough that it really is a different experience and something special. You can see in these photographs that the exhibit is divided into segments, which we've entitled Becoming, Building Research, and Community, which tell stories from Caltech from 1910 to 1930, spanning some of the same subjects that we're covering in our presentations, such as architecture, the history of science and engineering, and student and campus life. Our presentations this evening will cover some of these subjects as well, beginning with a presentation on Caltech's early architects, followed by a presentation on E.T. Bell and mathematics in the interwar period, and then finally, student life and the original Big T carved into a mountain. With our first presentation on Caltech's early architects, we have Loma Karklins.
In my previous presentation, The Greater Troop, I briefly made mention of the main architects who were responsible for the design of the campus master plan and the buildings built between 1910 and 1930, focusing more on each of the buildings rather than the architects themselves. As you learned, astronomer George Ellery Hale envisioned a campus with a unifying architectural style, and the buildings and spaces were to be designed on a grand scale. To achieve this, Hale successfully convinced the school's trustees to enlist the finest architects of the times. The first 2 to be hired were Myron Hunt and Elmer Gray, who were tasked with creating a campus master plan as well as design the first building. Hunt and Gray began their partnership around 1904. One of their earliest commissions had been to draw up plans for a complex of buildings at the Mount Wilson Observatory. And in 1907, they designed Pasadena's Valley Hunt Club clubhouse. Within a few short years, their talents were well known among Southern California's affluent and were designing many of their residences, among them one Henry Huntington in San Marino. In drawing up the master plan for the new campus, Hunt and Gray's designs were influenced by the 2 competing architectural styles that were very popular in California at the time, Mission Revival and Mediterranean Revival, which borrowed elements from Spanish and Italian Renaissance architecture. Characterized by stucco walls, red-tiled roofs, enclosed courtyards, arched colonnades, and wrought iron balconies, these elements were incorporated into California architecture. One could see the influence on private homes, hotels, municipal and commercial buildings, train stations, and many colleges and universities. And our campus was no exception, as seen here in this photo of Troop Hall. In time, this fusion of the Mediterranean and Mission Revival styles and the eventual inclusion of Spanish Baroque and Spanish colonial elements brought about a new architectural style in California known as Spanish Colonial Revival, which I will discuss further in a moment. Though Hunt and Gray would part company, they both would nevertheless continue to be very influential in shaping the architectural landscape of Southern California. Just to highlight a few of their other projects, Myron Hunt went on to design the Rose Bowl, seen here under construction in 1921. It was originally built with the southern end of the stadium open and was only enclosed into a complete bowl in 1928. Another of Hunt's projects was Pasadena's Central Public Library, completed in 1927, and which became the first building completed of the new Pasadena Civic Center. And the Flintridge Biltmore Hotel, better known today as Flintridge Sacred Heart Academy. Due to the Depression, the hotel failed, and by 1931, the property was taken over by the Dominican Sisters of San Jose to create an all-girls school. Elmer Gray was the chief architect on the design of the Beverly Hills Hotel, seen here under construction in 1912, and designed in the Mediterranean Revival style. In 1949, a more modern wing of the hotel was designed by renowned Black architect Paul Revere Williams, who is also credited for having designed the hotel's famous logo. Incidentally, it was just announced last week, on June 30th, that Paul Williams' personal papers will be acquired by USC's School of Architecture and the Getty Research Institute. Back to Elmer Gray, the Pasadena Playhouse was completed in 1924. Here, once again, you can see the signature elements of the Mission and Mediterranean Revival styles: a stucco exterior, arched colonnades, and a courtyard. In 1915, to celebrate the opening of the Panama Canal, San Diego opened the Panama, California Exposition, located in Balboa Park. Bertram Goodhue, a highly respected New York architect, took the lead for the exposition's layout and building. Though influenced by the Mission Revival and Mediterranean Revival styles, Goodhue was interested in adding more ornate architectural flourishes, borrowing not only from the Spanish Baroque and Spanish Colonial, but also from Middle Eastern architecture, which he was acquainted with after having spent 6 months traveling through Egypt, Persia, and parts of the Arabian Peninsula. This amalgam of styles would become known as Spanish Colonial Revival, and would become the dominant architectural style of California through the 1920s. And we continue to live with reminders of its impact on California architecture to this day. This is apparent here in Pasadena, where in 1923, a bond measure was passed to develop a civic center comprised of a city hall and to include a central library, which you already saw, a civic auditorium, a police department and municipal courthouse, and a U.S. post office. Pasadena City Hall is an excellent example of Spanish colonial revival. Impressed with this new architectural style developed and refined by Goodhue, George Ellery Hale convinced the trustees to invite Goodhue to consult on the design of the exterior of the new Gates Laboratory of Chemistry, as well as modify the Hunt and Gray master plan. Here in this watercolor, you can see not only the Spanish colonial revival influence, but also elements of Middle Eastern architecture, characterized by a long reflecting pool lined on either side by cypress trees leading up to a central building topped with a blue tiled dome. As highlighted in my previous presentation, Goodhue's architectural designs would be incorporated in most all the major campus buildings constructed between 1917 and 1928, and after his unexpected death in 1924, carried out to completion by his firm, Goodhue Associates. Besides the Caltech campus, locally Goodhue also designed the Los Angeles Central Public Library, which was completed in 1926. Here you can see Egyptian or Middle Eastern elements playing a greater role in Goodhue's design concept. And in Washington, D.C., the main building of the National Academy of Sciences was completed in 1924. Here, too, George Ellery Hale played an important role in persuading the NAS Council and the NRC Executive Board to approve Goodhue as the architect to design their building, with their specification, however, that it would be more classical in style. In 1928, Caltech's trustees were eager to begin work on developing the residential and social portion of the campus, and decided to enlist the talents of a local Southern California architect, Gordon Kaufman. Born in England, Kaufman had graduated from the London Polytechnic Institute around 1908 and had moved on to Vancouver, British Columbia before settling in Pasadena. In 1926, Kaufman distinguished himself with his master plan and dormitory designs for Claremont's Scripps College for Women. Here, in an aerial view of Scripps, you can get a better sense of the campus layout. Some of Kaufman's design elements here would be applied to his master plan for Caltech's undergraduate housing. Kaufman would honor the campus master plan and architecture originally envisioned by Myron Hunt and Elmer Gray, and further developed by Bertram Goodhue. Kaufman kept to the Mission and Mediterranean Revival styles with their signature elements of courtyards, archways, wrought iron gates, stucco walls, red tiled roofs, and connecting colonnades. And by 1931, this cluster of new undergraduate houses, Blacker, Dabney, Fleming, and Ricketts, also known as the South Houses, were now ready to accept students. Kaufman was also commissioned with the task of drawing up the architectural plans for the Athenaeum, Hale's dream of a meeting place for scholars modeled after London's Athenaeum Club, and membership open to persons associated with Caltech, the Huntington Library, and the Mount Wilson Observatory. The Athenaeum would be completed in 1930. A future presentation will discuss in greater detail the Athenaeum. After Caltech, Kaufman would continue to have great professional success and influence on American architecture. Some of his more famous projects locally were Santa Anita Park, which is the thoroughbred racetrack in Arcadia, which opened in 1934, the Los Angeles Times building, the headquarters of the newspaper, completed in 1935, and Boulder Dam, better known as Hoover Dam since 1947. Its construction began in 1931 and was completed in 1936. These then are Caltech's early architects. By enlisting the talents of these men, Hale's vision of a campus designed on a grand scale became a reality within a 20-year period, from 1910 to 1930. And not only did these four gentlemen have a great influence on the design and beauty of the Institute's campus, but they also became prominent figures of early 20th century American architecture. Thank you.
Thank you, Loma. And next, I have the pleasure of introducing Judith Goodstein, who will be presenting for us on E.T. Bell and mathematics between the wars.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Eric Temple Bell. He was a number theorist. He was a science fiction novelist who masqueraded as John Taine, and he was a poet. Bell joined the faculty of the California Institute of Technology in the fall of 1926 as a professor of mathematics. At 43, as one biographer put it, he had become a very hot commodity in mathematics. By then, Bell had spent 14 years on the faculty of the University of Washington, along with prestigious teaching stints at Harvard and the University of Chicago. 2 years before his arrival in Pasadena, he'd received the Bochet Prize for his 1921 papers in the Transactions of the American Mathematical Society on the subject of arithmetical paraphrases, a notion due to Bell himself. His very swift election to the National Academy of Sciences was expected. Bell's journey from a fishing village in Scotland to the very top levels of the mathematics world was anything but a simple one. He was born in Peterhead, a small fishing village located on a rocky peninsula facing the North Sea. He grew up in San Jose, California, and lived for 5 years in Bedford, a small town south of London. It was there, at the Bedford Modern School, that Bell encountered Edward Mann Langley, the teacher who would inspire him to become a mathematician at age 15. Years later, Bell would write, "Whatever success I have had as a mathematician, I attribute to Mr. Langley's coaching." Beyond that, however, Bell's early life was something of a mystery, even to relatives. Although Bell had passed the entrance exam for the University of London, there is no record he ever took any classes there. Instead, he packed his bags and in 1902, at the age of 19, boarded a ship at Liverpool bound for Montreal. Then he traveled by train across Canada. He crossed into the United States north of Seattle and made his way down the coast to San Jose, his boyhood home. He apparently never ventured across the Atlantic again, nor does it appear he ever saw his family again. Bell grew up in San Jose. He spent the first almost 13 years in San Jose, but for reasons known only to him, he never revealed this fact in 20th century authors or any other biographical work. He neglected to tell his wife and son about the years he spent growing up in San Jose as well. And the question is why? Constance Reed, who wrote a wonderful biography of E.T. Bell in 1993, spent a long time trying to answer the question, but she never succeeded. His father had been a fish curer in Scotland. Then he changed vocations completely and became an orchardist in San Jose. He died relatively early, and his widow sent the body back to be buried in Scotland. 3 months later, she took the family. He had a brother and a sister, and they all went back by ship to England. And Constance Reed never figured out why Bell refused to talk about it to anybody. But every year, around the time of the death of his father in January, Bell would go up to San Jose, even though there's no graveyard with his father buried there. He never told his wife or his son why he was going. Anyway, to continue with our story, Bell was a graduate of Stanford University in mathematics in 1904. Of course, Stanford is up the road from San Jose, and in those days, Stanford had no tuition. After he graduated, Bell went to San Francisco and was living in a boarding house at the time of the 1906 earthquake, and he buried these 2 math books in the yard. Several days later, Bell rescued his copy of Edward Lucas's 1891 classic text in number theory from the scorched earth. Beneath his name, and the names of two cities, Seattle and San Francisco, Bell wrote the following inscription: "This book went through the San Francisco fire, April 16, 1906. Those two books are now in the Caltech archives. With 1 degree already to his name, Bell had earned a master's degree in mathematics from the University of Washington in 1908. He took his PhD at Columbia University in 1912, but had signed up to teach in the Pacific Northwest even before he had turned in his dissertation." Coming down the coast now, Bell had been lured to Pasadena by the renowned experimental physicist Robert A. Millikan. Millikan was in the act of transforming what had been a modest technical school into one of the school's foremost scientific institutes. It had started out in 1891 as Troup University, named for its founder, philanthropist Amos G. Troup. At the end of World War I, it had a new name, a handsome endowment, and under Millikan, a new educational philosophy. Catalog descriptions of Caltech's program of advanced study and research in pure mathematics in the 1920s were intended to interest students specializing in mathematics to devote some of their attention to the modern applications of mathematics, that is, to spend a little time doing applied mathematics. However, Millikan had given Bell some indication that he might build up pure mathematics at the Institute, now that matrices had come into fashion in physics, thanks to the recent invention of matrix mechanics as a way to formulate quantum theory. But Bell came to understand, even before setting foot on the campus, that Millikan's conversion, so to speak, was something of a delusion. As he told Aristotle Michael, a job-hunting postdoc in mathematics whom he'd met at Harvard, and I quote, "Our first job will be to convert Millikan to pure mathematics. He thinks he's already converted, but he hasn't passed the half of his salvation." And Bell knew what he was talking about. In another letter written in 1926, Bell noted that Caltech stars were the theoretical physicist Paul Epstein, an expert on quantum theory, the English mathematical physicist Harry Bateman, who wore many scientific hats. Bell would call him inexhaustible, and Richard Chase Tolman, who was, as Bell put it, a mathematician gone wrong on chemistry. In short, our man Bell was a man of strong opinions about many things. He was also well aware of the lesser status of pure mathematics at Caltech, but he had hopes of turning Millikan around. Bell had reasons to be optimistic. Pure mathematics had blossomed into an active and expanding discipline in the U.S. in the decade following the end of World War I. In 1926, his own publishing record, which had begun at Washington in 1915, ran to 68 titles, a substantial number for a 10-year period, and really just a fraction of his career total of more than 300, and that is not counting his fictional output as John Payne. It was a number probably matched only by Leonard Dixon, who specialized in algebra and number theory at Chicago. Nevertheless, before even hiring Bell, Millikan had polled 3 of the country's leading mathematicians. More important, from Millikan's point of view, all 3 were members in good standing of the National Academy of Sciences. And from the start, Millikan had insisted on inviting only scientists of National Academy caliber to join him in Pasadena, which explains why the recently anointed Nobel Prize winner asked his fellow academicians what Bell's chances were of election to the National Academy. Chicago's Dixon flatly predicted Bell would be elected to the Academy before Bateman, which proved correct. Bell would be elected in 1927. Bateman's election followed in 1930. Unlike most American institutions of higher learning, Caltech lacked traditional departments and department chairs. So Bell became a member of the Physics, Mathematics, and Electrical Engineering Division, which reported to Millikan. Bell would be responsible for the graduate work in mathematics, and the mathematicians looked to him to speak up for the field and take the lead in dealing with Millikan. So let's look at the picture of the group who posed in front of the Norman Bridge Laboratory in 1931. Front row has all of the stars. Einstein is in the middle, sitting next to Millikan, whose hands are crossed. Next to Einstein going the other way is Walter Mayer, a differential geometer who came with Einstein and did many of his calculations. Next to him is Richard Tolman, then Harry Bateman, and next to Bateman is E.T. Bell. Bell's first graduate student was Morgan Ward. Morgan Ward entered Caltech in 1924, one of only 48 graduate students altogether. After earning his bachelor's degree at UC Berkeley, Ward became Caltech's first PhD in mathematics, receiving his degree in 1928 with a dissertation on the foundations of general arithmetic. This was followed by his appointment as a research fellow. Like physics and chemistry at Caltech, mathematics tapped its own students from the 1920s on. In 1929, Ward joined the faculty as an assistant professor of mathematics, and aside from a year at Princeton, in 1934-35, he remained at Caltech until his death in 1963. His research interests ranged from recurring series, Diophantine equations, abstract arithmetic and lattice theory, to functional equations and numerical analysis. Like Bell, he had a deep interest in the theory of numbers. However, the transformation of the mathematics faculty, which Robert Millikan had largely regarded as a service department, into a first-class research group, only began after 1945, when Millikan retired as Caltech's head. Bell would retire sometime after in 1953, 27 years after coming to Pasadena. Although Bell was a prolific writer of novels, of poetry, and of science fiction, under his pseudonym of John Taine, he achieved true rock star recognition, or something approaching it, among mathematicians and non-mathematicians alike for Men of Mathematics, published in 1937. Still popular today, Men of Mathematics discusses the personalities and mathematics of a host of great mathematicians, including Niels Henrik Abel, Carl Friedrich Gauss, David Hilbert, and Bernhard Riemann, concentrating on those born from the 18th century on. Bell also had his detractors, some of whom accused him of being flippant. Reviewers of Men of Mathematics complained of his inclination to sacrifice historical accuracy for a more colorful story. Bell's most significant mathematical contributions were in the field we now call combinatorics. During the Second World War, artificial intelligence came of age alongside the digital computer. The study of networks for simulating the central nervous system helped to motivate graph theory and, in general, helped to stimulate a revival of combinatorial theory after the war. Bell's work on exponential and iterated exponential numbers, exponential polynomials, and the symbolic or umbral calculus was much cited in the literature on combinatorial analysis of the 50s and 60s. Bell contributed, among other things, to the development of formal power series and generating functions as tools for obtaining recurrence relations, which are important for treating combinatorial problems in a unified way. The solution of recurrence relations derived from some kind of counting problem is perhaps the most common, basic, and elementary application of generating functions in combinatorial theory. But let us sum up in a sentence or two. For all the clairvoyance, wit, and sagacity that ushered forth from the pen of Bell, the science fiction writer, Bell was first and foremost a good mathematician. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judy. And now we move on to our third and final presentation for the evening. Student Life and the Original Big T Carved into a Mountain by Elisa Picchio.
Good afternoon. When Truk Polytechnic Institute moved to the current campus in 1910, no dormitories were maintained by the institute, but a list of approved places was suggested where board and room may be found. The bulletin noted that a few students boarded themselves, but warned that such a plan of living was not generally recommended. One wonders if it was considered dangerous, undignified, or just a waste of time for them to cook. So students would live outside campus in private houses like this one. From 1914, a club room in Pasadena Hall, which would later be called the Troop Hall, served as a social center for the campus. In 1916, the college provided a dormitory by moving the two-story building that had been a Truk Polytechnic Institute on North Raymond. It was moved in sections and was a California bungalow with about 30 large, airy, and well-lit rooms, says the bulletin, which were occupied by 2 students each. Sanitary facilities were in common, and some rooms had sleeping porches. The building, known as Old Dorm, included a dining room, living room, and recreation rooms. Walking through Troop Hall from the dormitory would have taken the students through a sweet-smelling orange grove. And here are the first occupants of the dormitory in 1916. Caltech's young men always look very serious and formal in these pictures, so it's nice to find a smiley one, and to figure that some college wear was more whimsical. The hat was called Dink and was worn by freshmen, and here is one wearing it. Both the hat and the badge are currently on display in our exhibit. We can learn about student life in those early years directly from one of those students, Arthur Klein. He arrives at Truk in 1916, where he earns his bachelor degree in 1921 and his PhD in 1925. He will later become a professor of aeronautics at Caltech, and he recorded an oral history with us when he was in his 80s. Here he recalls how it all started.
My parents did not really understand me. They wanted me to go into the business, or my mother wanted me to become a physician, but my instincts were not in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
They were not difficult parents, though,
Mm-hmm.
and they let me come to Caltech when it was a very small school,
Mm-hmm.
with no graduate school.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I was for some reason taken by Caltech, and I entered in 1916 after graduating from high school. I lived on the campus in the old dorm.
He was a local student, which was not unusual since most students in the roster hailed from the county of Los Angeles. The majority from Pasadena, a few from Alhambra, South Pasadena, Altadena, Los Angeles, and Glendale. Klein's family lived in Los Angeles at 6th and Vermont. He would go home on Friday or Saturday at noon and come back to campus on Sunday night. He would take the 6th Street car downtown, right by the Pacific Electric Building, and then take the Oak Knoll car and come up to California and Lake. When he arrived, the entire academic life of the Institute took place in Troop Hall, which was the only permanent building. There were some wooden temporary construction, including the power plant and the hydromechanical laboratory, which were later burned down or destroyed. He remembers that the chemistry laboratories were on the top floor in Troop Hall, under the roof, but in the middle of his freshman year, they moved into the newly built Gates Laboratory of Chemistry. Klein gives us an intriguing picture of life on campus.
Well, the campus was wild. I had always been a bad draftsman, and I had to make up my freshman engineering drafting during the summer. And I was working in an office, in a unused office in Troop Hall on the second floor. And when I got tired making drawings, I had borrowed a .22 automatic rifle from a friend of mine, schoolmate, classmate, and went out on the balcony at the end of Troop Hall and shot ground squirrels. I was never rebuked or any remarks made about this occupation.
Oh, really?
This gives you an idea what the campus was like.
Yeah.
It was completely unimproved except for the part that was used.
Uh-huh.
The part of the campus behind Troop Hall was still an orange grove, which had gone pretty much to seed.
The campus might have been wild, but the Institute had a very serious view of academics. The bulletin stated it is taken for granted that students enter the Institute with serious purposes and that they will cheerfully conform to such regulation as may be made by the faculty. The moral tone of the Institute is exceptionally good, and cases requiring severe discipline seldom occur. Any conduct harmful to the moral atmosphere of the Institute will render a student liable to dismissal. While there were no consequences to squirrel shooting, Klein did run into problems when he started having fun with the Institute facilities.
In my senior year, I had too much spare time, and along with two other people, we got into trouble. The result of this, we were expelled. This is for general hell raising around the campus. It was a lot of trivial things like rewiring some of the electrical laboratories so it could fuse people, fixing up the little wind tunnels so it blew the wrong way, more or less technological pranks. That's why it took me 5 years to get my bachelor's.
Serious academic work needed to be balanced with some fun. Since very early on, dances were very popular and came in many varieties. Sophomore Hope, Varsity Club, Freshman Scud, Senior Dance, and the dormitory dances like the one we see in these pictures, taken by Klein himself. After the February 1921 event, the California Tech reported that for more than 3 hours, Bush, Barnes, and Stanley's orchestra provided music that kept 55 couples on their toes. The dormitory was strikingly decorated. Over the main entrance hung a huge orange tea, which cast its mellow glow over the orange grove and the inviting chairs in front of the building. Inside, numerous pennants succeeded in conveying the conventional idea of college life. The crowd danced until midnight, and the Pasadena's closing ordinance regretfully brought the end of a perfect evening. The students took advantage of all the free space on campus for some recreation and to keep close to their beloved and much tinkered on vehicles. In 1923, their creativity found a new outlet in theatrical performances. The first on record was The Atomizer, an original musical comedy. It was staged at the Pasadena High School, which was then near campus, where the Pasadena City College is today. And all male cast shown in this musical farce with a Middle East mystery theme. The Pasadena Star News enthused a musical show of Caltech Big Hit. A scientific expedition to the Sahara Desert carried a cargo of tantalizing tunes, unique richness of costumes and settings, clever scenic effects. Costumes were rented from Hollywood for $500 a performance. And the Big T noted with satisfaction that after the demonstration given by the production, the argument that plays cannot be presented successfully in non-co-educational institutions is entirely refuted. And indeed, staging performances became part of the Institute offerings. A few years later, in 1925, the bulletin boasted of exceptional facilities in dramatic work and stated that each year a classical play, Greco-Roman, is presented under the auspices of Pi Kappa Delta, with participation open to the whole student body. A modern play is given under the auspices of the English department, open likewise to all students. Both of these plays are produced under the direction of Mr. Gilmore Brown, director of the internationally famous Pasadena Community Playhouse. In 1924, student life reached another milestone with the dedication of a long-needed student center and recreation building, the Dugout. The name was taken from a popular shed that offered lunch and snacks, and that was a beloved gathering place. The new building was attached to the dormitory, and it was donated by trustee Robert Blaker. The students' dugout committee came up with the idea of a massive fireplace to be built with the help of the entire student body. Bricks were sold for $1 each, engraved with the name of purchaser, and included in construction. The faculty furnished the hearthstone, the seniors the bronze model, the juniors the large bronze tea, the sophomores the mantle supported by two beaver hats, and the freshmen the endirons. After a billiard table, a piano, and numerous tables and chairs were put in to accommodate the midday rush, the dugout was officially dedicated with a proper ceremony on February 11 and formally opened. Since early on, all students were organized into an association known as the Associated Student Body. The association dealt with affairs of general concern, with matters delegated by the faculty, and with the administration of the cherished Caltech honor system, which continues to guide campus life today. The 1923 yearbook states, "This system is our traditionally accepted means of control and government, which applies the principles of honesty, self-control, and conduct befitting a gentleman and engineer to all student relations. It enables the professor to be absent from the classroom during an examination." The association elected its officers and a board of control. And this picture shows the first executive committee once Troop became a Caltech. It was the student body, through its elected representatives, that managed the student publication, the Troop Tech. It began as a quarterly issue in 1914, then became monthly in 1917. This one is one of the last issues of the Troop Tech announcing the imminent change of name. The newspaper changed its name with the Institute and became weekly in 1920. Here, the major headline is Dr. Shearer's resignation as president of the Institute. And here are the editors at work in 1921. The student body produced also an annual publication, the yearbook. In 1916, it shared the name of Troop Tech with the newspaper. It became Orange and White in 1920, then the Big T in 1921. It grew from 60 to 220 pages. The big capital T that we see on the cover refers to the huge letter that the students engraved on the side of Mount Wilson a few years before. The carving of the 300 by 400 foot emblem began on a Saturday in December 1915. The story is told in the Big T. That morning, a small group of men were seen starting out on the long, tall road up Mount Wilson. After following it for 5 miles, they turned off the trail and made their way through the underbrush until they emerged on the crest of a small peak overlooking Pasadena. Here they stopped and with the tools that they brought with them began to make a clearing. The brush proved to be tough and progress was slow, but by evening quite a large opening had been made to reward the efforts. Over 4 Saturdays, the entire student body had cleared 70,000 feet of mountainside from greasewood, cactus and brush. And at the end, the finished T stood out against the hillside as an emblem of the institution. The carving was guided from the roof of Troop Hall by students looking through a transit. They telephoned instruction to a watcher near the mountain, who then waved them using flags to the workers on the hillside. And this is how a transit looked like. It is an optical instrument for measuring angles to help in construction, like the one held in our collection of scientific instruments. It became then a tradition for freshmen to take a day off during the first term and join a tea party to maintain the clearing. The students started from Pasadena early in the morning, and before noon the work was finished. By 1929, the inscription faced the ardent opposition of the Pasadena Garden Club, who found it an eyesore, and the United States Forest Service. But Executive Council Chairman Robert Millikan declined to force its removal, while other schools in the region, like Occidental, Pomona, Stanford, and Redlands, kept their own hillside symbols. Nevertheless, the effort was mostly abandoned over the following years, and students stopped maintaining the T in the late 1920s or early 1930s. To conclude this section of our talk, we are able to bring back to life some snippets of campus life by showing you this film shot between 1927 and 1931 by student John Burton Hatcher using his CEP camera. The first scene takes place in front of Troop Hall. Next, we move to the Norman Bridge Laboratory of Physics. It's pretty bare. And the High Voltage Laboratory there. Here's the taking of a class photo in front of Troop Hall. And finally, some fun after a lot of hard work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elisa. So now we have an opportunity for all of our audience to submit any questions that you would be interested in our team from the archives in answering. We, of course, particularly appreciate questions related to our presentations, but we've enjoyed trying to answer a number of more distant questions over our past couple of presentations. So if you'd like to try to stump the archivists, you're welcome to do that as well. And we do have one question in so far, which is, I wrote one book review for the California Tech in 1986. What volume of the Tech would that be? Does the archive keep some digital assets of the newspaper? And so there is indeed a digitized edition of the Tech, which you can find on the web. You can find the Tech as part of Caltech campus pubs.library.caltech.edu. It's not perfectly searchable because optical character recognition is imperfect, but my first shot at it would be searching for your own name, and I think you might find your review that way. Any other suggestions on finding things in those digital collections from my fellow panelists? This is, I think, one of our main research methods, so we have a lot of experience with it.
If he remembers the exact issue, the date of the issue that he wrote it in, they're all listed literally by date. And so he could go literally to the date and find the copy.
I have a question that I think I can direct to all three of our presenters, any of you who choose to take a shot at it. When were the old houses built, and was there anything beyond mere growth that precipitated their building?
What do you mean by the old houses?
I think we're referring to the South houses.
If they're talking about the South houses, they were finished in 1931, and that's when the students could move in. And no other dormitories were built until the 1960s. I believe 1960 is when what would be considered the North houses were built. And there was an attempt to also then create a dining center, which became the Chandler Dining Hall, and eventually Winnett Center, which today is now the new Hamitmont Center.
Do we have any thoughts on what the motivations were for the construction of the South houses?
Well, they were originally part of the plan, because if you look at the original renderings that were done by both Hunt and Gray and then later by Goodhue, they did exist off in the distance. There was always plans that dormitories would be built beyond what was called the old dorm, and then obviously once they decided to build quality dormitories, and the student body was also increasing by now, it was essential to create new housing and eventually tear down the old dorm, which needed tearing down because it was built originally, I believe, in 1910. So it was time to give new housing to the students.
We have a few more questions. One about the history of the library, which is our own institutional home. When did we develop a library, and what buildings have hosted it? And I can maybe have some fragmentary answers, but I'd certainly appreciate others.
Well, I'll help you along. Go right ahead.
So we do see a library at Caltech as far back as the period we've been talking about. And one of the women staff who we were able to emphasize the role of on campus in our presentations 2 weeks ago, which included a presentation by Elisa on women at Caltech in these early years, was the institute librarian of that time. My understanding is that the library originated on this campus in Troop Hall, and that then as new buildings were built, including as early as 1917 when Gates was built, additional libraries were built as well in additional buildings, so that even, we only had 2 major buildings on campus in 1917. We also had 2 libraries on campus at that point. And that began a trend of the proliferation of libraries across Caltech, which continued for quite some time although the more recent trend has been some consolidation. So those are, those earliest buildings I know did house the library. And I think Troop Hall continued to be a library space until the construction of Milliken, but I'm not certain of that.
No.
No, please correct me.
I think, well, at least physics had a library in East Bridge. It was a wonderful library. And probably math was there as well. Physics and math were in East Bridge. When Milliken was built, then they moved that collection over.
Yeah,
And they kept the library open, and you could check out books the same day. They were very proud of that.
To add to that, it seems that originally each division had its own library. And
That's true. Geology had its own library, and astronomy had its own library. Chemistry, of course, had it in Gates. I think by the 60s, Troop had really become an administrative building. The registrar's office was there, the president's office, provost's office, treasurer.
Also, there had always been a dream of having one large central library, and there had been architects brought in to draw something akin to that in the same spot where today the Milliken building stands. And so then this dream of having a central library was finally realized in 1967, I believe.
I think so, right. But geology never moved. They stayed. Astronomy stayed. In other words, it may have been centralized, but the different divisions at Caltech liked having the books close to their students and professors.
And Troop Hall initially had two. There was the general library that was on the ground floor, and under the tower there was the web library that contained a chemistry collection and also a special research collection on general topics on leading engineer and other books. And I think it was modeled after some kind of Oxford library in England. The web is called the web library. I think they were the webs were the donors for the contributing.
We have a few more questions. One is about the landscaping of the campus in this period, which I don't know any details about, but who did the landscaping? And also the orange trees that we saw between Troop Hall and the old dorm, were those the original orange trees?
I would assume they're the originals. I don't think anybody came in to plant new ones. It was basically, as the need arose to build more buildings, the orange trees slowly disappeared. And as far as landscaping goes, over the years, obviously, there have been different people who've done landscaping. I do know that around the Athenaeum, that Beatrice Ferrand, who was a well-known landscaper in the area, and Max Ferrand's wife, known quantities here in Pasadena, but she was, I believe, the one who landscaped and chose which trees would be planted around the Athenaeum, many of which continue to remain to this day.
Yes, and she did the original landscape for the courtyard in the Humanities Building in Dabney.
Mm.
But it's been changed. The original design is somewhat gone now.
It used to be greener. It's not so green anymore. So.
The photograph that Elisa showed us, or actually this was part of the film that Elisa showed us, of men jumping into that pool. What became of that pool? Has it moved? Has it closed?
So the three of us, Loma, Peter, and myself, we looked closely and we could not come up with a solution to the mystery. We could not tell which building is in the back. So no, we don't know.
We don't know.
We were curious ourselves, but we were not able to come up with an answer.
So I think we're happy to share the video clip with anyone who wants to look closer for clues.
Yeah, if anybody has some suggestion, they're very welcome.
We have a very contemporary question. Is the honor system still alive and well? And I don't know that I'm qualified to assess the health of the honor system. I can certainly say it's still on the books. And I do hear current students speak of the honor system occasionally. So it might be a question for current faculty and students of its exact condition, but it is present, yes. Oh, here's an interesting one. In the 1960s, there was a very old book of witchcraft and magic spells on a shelf in the Dabney Library. And indeed, a few Page House undergraduates made an effort to validate some of the spells. Are books from Dabney of that era still around? So certainly many are, not all. I don't know. I don't know. It would take some effort to find the exact book, but we could certainly look for it. If we had a title, of course, we could tell if we still had it. I'm very curious to see it myself. We do have located here in Archives and Special Collections a collection of rare books that are very old, a few of which have something to do with witchcraft and magic spells, although it's predominantly a history of science collection. But I think that we certainly might have some things to show you if you're able to visit us at some point in the future. And we have one more landscaping question, which is, when did the olive trees get planted?
In the 20s. Fleming liked olive trees.
Aha. So if he was footing the bill, he wanted to see.
He was footing the bill.
Yes.
Right.
And I think we're going to wrap up with one final question, which is about the location of the old dorm and what's in that location currently.
Well, the new Hamitman Center, and before that, the Winnett Center, because once the second set of dorms were built on the north side of the walkway, it was time to basically build a better sort of student center, which became the Winnett Center, which was then torn down recently to make way for the Hamitman Center. So the next time you visit the campus and you visit the Hamitman Center, then you can try to imagine, if you can, the old dorm approximately there. It would have backed up against Page because we do have a photo of the old chimney that was left after they tore down the old dorm and its adjoining buildings. And that will be coming up in a future talk, because there'll be talk about the bricks that came from that chimney. But you can see Page right behind it, because that had already been built. So, so that gives you some idea. And then obviously from there, then going west towards Troop, you now have the Thomas Gates building, or maybe I have that reversed. Maybe it's Gates Thomas now. But that's basically sitting approximately where the old orange groves used to be.
So to wrap up, Leslie Maxfield has put in the chat a URL at which you can find the recordings of our previous two presentation events that we've done in this series. And you can also find there the plans for our 3 future events in the series. So please do take a look. Please do register for our presentations to come. We'll look forward to presenting for all of you again in 2 weeks. And thank you all very much for joining us. It's really been a pleasure, and thank you for the wonderful questions. And thank you as well to our wonderful academic media technologies colleagues for facilitating all of this, and to our archives colleagues, Elisa Picchio, Judith Goodstein, and Loma Karklins for their terrific presentations. Have a good evening.